Robert Oppenheimer was born on April 22, 1904, in New York City, where he was given the name Julius Robert Oppenheimer. He quickly became known mostly by his middle name, and is often called Robert Oppenheimer or J. Robert Oppenheimer today. Robert came from a wealthy Jewish family in New York City. His father, Julius, was born in Hesse-Nassau, a region in Prussia which became part of the United German Empire just months before he was born, in May 1871. During a time when anti-Semitism was growing in Western and Central Europe, Julius Oppenheimer left Germany in 1888 at the age of 17 and traveled to the United States. Although he arrived with very little money, he did well in America, and by the time Robert was born in 1904, he had become a successful executive at a top textile company in Manhattan. Robert's mother was Ella Friedman, also of Jewish descent, who was born in New York in 1870 to a family of German Jews that immigrated to America a generation before Julius Oppenheimer. She was an artist, and Robert adopted some of her views on life and the universe. Ella and Julius had one other child, a son named Frank, who was born in 1912, 8 years after Robert. Robert went to the Ethical Culture School and then to the Alcuin Preparatory School, which were two of the best schools in New York during the early 1900s. By age 5, he already showed an interest in mineralogy, a passion he got from his German grandfather. His talent was so evident that at the age of 11, he became a member of the Mineralogical Club of New York City. His early abilities continued through high school, and he completed his time at Alcuin in a year and a half, which was shorter than usual, as he completed 2 grades in 12 months and advanced quickly through the 8th grade. By then, his interests had shifted from mineralogy to the more rigorous sciences, especially chemistry, although it would be physics that he would embrace in the future. In 1922, Oppenheimer started his studies at Harvard University when he was just 18. While at America's oldest university, he was greatly impacted by Professor Percy Bridgman's lessons, an experimental physicist who taught there at the time. This was also a time when students at Harvard and other top universities in America were required to study many subjects, and Oppenheimer immersed himself in history as well as Greek and Latin classics, which were still important in many Western education programs in the 1920s. Later in life, Oppenheimer reflected on his time at Harvard, saying he spent most of it in the library and read a lot. He even attended more classes than he needed to. As a result, in 1925, Oppenheimer graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree, earning the highest honors. Just 3 years at Harvard is a mark of achievement that usually required 4 years to reach. But Oppenheimer, following a growing trend, finished in less time than expected. Before he even graduated from Harvard, Oppenheimer had already been accepted to further his education at Cambridge University in England. This was the main place for studying physics in Britain at that time, a reputation it has been maintained since the days of Isaac Newton in the late 17th century. The year Oppenheimer spent at Cambridge, from the fall of 1925 to the summer of 1926, played a key role in his growth as he learned from the Lord Ernest Rutherford, a physicist from New Zealand who is often seen as the father of nuclear physics today. For example, Rutherford was the first to find out and explain what nuclear half-life is and the radiation linked to it, an accomplishment that earned him a Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1908. After getting into Cambridge, Oppenheimer wrote to Ernest Rutherford asking if he could work at the Cavendish Laboratory. However, a letter of recommendation from Bridgman hinted that Oppenheimer's awkwardness in the lab suggested that he should focus on theoretical physics instead of experimental physics. Rutherford was not impressed, but Oppenheimer went to Cambridge anyway. J.J. Thomson finally accepted him with the condition that he finish a basic lab course. Oppenheimer felt very unhappy at Cambridge and wrote to a friend, "I'm having a really rough time. The lab work is really dull, and I am so bad at it that I can't feel like I'm learning anything." He also had a strained relationship with his tutor, Patrick Blackett, who would later win a Nobel Prize. Oppenheimer's friend, Francis Ferguson, claimed that Oppenheimer once admitted to leaving a poisoned apple on Blackett's desk. and Oppenheimer's parents persuaded the university not to kick him out. There are no records of any poisoning incident or probation, but Oppenheimer regularly met with a psychiatrist. Oppenheimer was a tall, thin chain smoker who often forgot to eat when he was very focused. Many friends said he could be harmful to himself. Toward the end of his first year at Cambridge, Oppenheimer, whose skills were starting to gain significant recognition among European physicists, accepted an offer from the theoretical physicist Max Born, studied under him at the University of Göttingen in Germany, one of Europe's prominent centers of learning. There, Oppenheimer learned with several peers who would become major figures in the field of theoretical physics in the 20th century, including Werner Heisenberg, Enrico Fermi, and Edward Teller, several of whom Oppenheimer would later collaborate with. During the Manhattan Project, in the middle of the Second World War, Oppenheimer earned his Doctor of Philosophy degree in March 1927, when he was just 23 years old, with Born as his supervisor. During his time in Europe, Oppenheimer wrote over a dozen papers, making significant contributions to the emerging area of quantum mechanics. Together with Born, he published a well-known paper concerning the Born-Oppenheimer approximation. This approximation distinguishes between nuclear and electronic movements in the math used to study molecules, which helps simplify calculations by allowing nuclear movement to be ignored. It is still his most frequently referenced work. This approximation came about largely because of Oppenheimer's strong interests in both chemistry and physics. The theory they put forward included concepts from quantum chemistry and molecular physics. Practically speaking, the approximation was crucial for scientists beginning in the late 1920s, as it enabled them to differentiate between the movements of nuclei and electrons. The individual who collaborated with Max Born and earned his PhD in Göttingen was a rather intriguing person. Oppenheimer had a blend of being a distant scientist and a fairly cheerful person, sometimes shifting from being shy to outgoing, depending on his mood or the situation. A chain smoker, he was constantly enveloped in smoke throughout his adult life, a habit that would significantly contribute to his early death in his 60s. As time passed, he developed a bit of arrogance, but balanced this with intellectual kindness towards his peers and students in later years. One notable feature of his character was his fascination with Eastern philosophy and mysticism, particularly his interest in Hinduism and Confucianism. He even took the step of learning Sanskrit, which is the holy language of Hinduism, to read the ancient religious texts in their original form. His interest in spirituality and mysticism was not just a quirky hobby. For Oppenheimer, studying physics served as a way to delve into the mysterious aspects of the universe and existence. His broader intellectual curiosity was more about exploration than simply gathering hard scientific evidence. However, there was also an unpredictable and inconsistent side to Oppenheimer. He often felt like an outsider and is known to have experienced episodes of depression. In essence, he was a bit of a mystery. After he finished his education at Göttingen and published several more papers based on research he conducted in England and Germany, Oppenheimer came back to the United States. After briefly working at Harvard and Caltech, returned to Europe for a few months to work at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands and in Zurich, Switzerland. It wasn't until 1929 that Oppenheimer decided to stay in America for good. He accepted 2 positions and took on the role of Associate Professor of Physics at both the University of California at Berkeley and Caltech. For the following 13 years, from 1929 to 1942, he worked at both schools, teaching in the fall and winter at Berkeley, and then giving lectures in the spring at Caltech in Pasadena. In the 1930s, Oppenheimer gained recognition in the American physics community for his teaching style, and many of the most skilled physicists in the mid-20th century trained under him at Berkeley and Caltech within the School of Theoretical Physics that he established. Typically, there was a group of about a dozen advanced graduate students and research fellows who collaborated closely with Oppenheimer on significant questions in theoretical physics at that time. His students and colleagues found him captivating. He had a magnetic presence in private, but often seemed distant in public. People had mixed views about him. Some admired him as a brilliant yet detached genius, while others saw him as pretentious and insecure. His students mostly viewed him in a favorable light, mimicking his walk, way of speaking, and even his habit of reading texts in their original languages. He was capable of identifying the key problems based on the topics he chose to cover. He was deeply engaged with these issues, persistently seeking solutions and sharing his passion with the group. At its peak, his group included about 8 to 10 graduate students and 6 postdoctoral fellows. He met with them each day in his office, discussing each student's research progress. He had a broad range of interests, and in one afternoon, they could touch on topics like quantum electrodynamics, cosmic rays, electron pair production, and nuclear physics. Oppenheimer conducted significant research in theoretical astronomy, focusing mainly on general relativity and nuclear theory, as well as in nuclear physics, spectroscopy, and quantum field theory, which includes its extension into quantum electrodynamics. He also found the complicated math of relativistic quantum mechanics interesting, but he was skeptical about its accuracy. His research anticipated many discoveries that followed, such as the neutron, meson, and neutron star. At first, he was mainly interested in the theory of continuous spectrum. His first published article, released in 1926, dealt with the quantum theory of molecular band spectra. He created a method to calculate transition probabilities for it. He worked on the photoelectric effect for hydrogen and X-rays, and figured out the absorption coefficient at the K-edge. His calculations matched the observations related to the sun's X-ray absorption, but not with helium. Later on, it became clear that the sun is mostly hydrogen, confirming that his calculations were right. Oppenheimer made significant contributions to understanding cosmic ray showers. He also investigated field electron emission, which helped develop the idea of quantum tunneling. In 1931, he co-authored a paper titled Relativistic Theory of the Photoelectric Effect with his student Harvey Hall. In this paper, based on experimental data, he accurately argued against Paul Dirac's claim that 2 energy levels of the hydrogen atom had the same energy. Later, one of his doctoral students, Willis Lamb, found out that this was due to what is now referred to as the Lamb shift, which earned Lamb a Nobel Prize in Physics in 1955. With Melba Phillips, who was the first graduate student to start her PhD under Oppenheimer's guidance, he calculated artificial radioactivity when nuclei were bombarded by deuterons. When Ernest Lawrence and Edwin McMillan bombarded nuclei, their results closely matched what George Gamow predicted, but higher energies and heavier nuclei did not fit the predictions. In 1935, Oppenheimer and Phillips developed a theory, now known as the Oppenheimer-Phillips process, to explain these findings. This theory is still relevant today. As early as 1930, Oppenheimer wrote a paper that essentially predicted the positron's existence. This was after Dirac suggested that electrons could have positive charge and negative energy. Dirac's work introduced what is now called the Dirac equation, which brought together quantum mechanics, special relativity, and the new idea of electron spin to explain the Zeeman effect. Citing experimental evidence, Oppenheimer dismissed the notion that the predicted positively charged electrons were protons, arguing that they would need to have the same mass as an electron, while experiments showed that protons were significantly heavier. 2 years later, Carl David Anderson found the positron, earning the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1936. These and many other discoveries made by Oppenheimer and his students at Berkeley and Caltech helped establish California as one of the leading centers for theoretical physics in the mid-20th century. He was diagnosed with a mild form of tuberculosis in the late 1920s. Because of this illness, he went to the dry air of Arizona and New Mexico in the following years and eventually purchased a ranch in New Mexico. In the middle of the 1930s, he started a romantic relationship with Jean Tatlock, a student studying psychiatry. She was the daughter of John Strong Tatlock, a well-known expert in Old English and a specialist on Geoffrey Chaucer's life and work. John was 10 years younger than Robert and struggled with serious depression and confusion about her sexuality. Their relationship was intense and continued until 1940, even after Oppenheimer began dating Kitty Harrison. Kitty was a botanist and physicist at Caltech, who divorced her second husband, Stuart Harrison, in November 1940 and married Robert the next day. It is still uncertain if Oppenheimer occasionally met with Tatlock in early 1944, before she tragically ended her life in January 1944. Robert and Kitty later had 2 children, a son named Peter, who was born in May 1941, as Kitty was already pregnant when they got married. They also had a daughter named Catherine after her mother, who was born in 1944. Oppenheimer's life, like that of nearly everyone across Europe, North Africa, North America, and much of Asia, was dramatically affected by the start of the Second World War in the fall of 1939. During the 1920s, Oppenheimer was not aware of what was happening in the world. He said he did not read newspapers or popular magazines and only found out about the Wall Street crash of 1929 while walking with Ernest Lawrence 6 months later. He mentioned that he had never voted until the presidential election in 1936. From 1934 onward, he started to care more about politics and global issues. The war began mainly due to the rise of the Nazis, led by Adolf Hitler, who took power in Germany in early 1933. The Nazis were a fanatically anti-Semitic nationalist and fascist group determined to eliminate the Jewish population in Germany and to start a new war in Europe to change the rules of the Treaty of Versailles, which had ended the First World War. They aimed to create a new German empire, the Third Reich, that would control the continent. The Nazis' harsh treatment of Jewish people became much more severe, starting in 1936, and especially in 1938, when Germany began taking over nearby countries, first Austria, then Czechoslovakia. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, Britain and France declared war on Germany. However, people in the United States were not fully supportive of getting involved in what they saw as a European conflict. As a result, the U.S. officially stayed neutral for the first 2 years of the war, even though President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's government was already supplying weapons and resources to Britain since the war began. Oppenheimer's life and historical significance would drastically change because of the events in December 1941. At that point, the United States was still neutral in World War II, even though Europe faced a dire situation, with the Nazis taking over Poland in the fall of 1939, Denmark and Norway in the spring of the next year, and later the Low Countries and France during the summer of 1940. Many other countries, such as Italy, Hungary, and Romania, were allied with the Nazis, and there were ongoing invasions of British colonies in North Africa and Russia starting from the summer of 1941. It seemed likely that Germany would control Europe. Amidst this situation, Japan, a nation with extreme nationalism looking to build an Asian and Pacific empire, which already included Korea, Manchuria, and a large part of eastern China by the early 1940s, chose to attack the United States without first declaring war. The assault on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii and other American territories like the Philippines on December 7, 1941, pulled the United States into World War II. Soon after, the U.S. found itself at war with Germany, Italy, and other nations in the Axis alliance. The entire Northern Hemisphere ended up in conflict. Oppenheimer quickly rose to a key position in America's research initiatives during the war. This was in relation to Germany's efforts to develop a weapon of mass destruction to win the war quickly. In the 1920s and 1930s, Germany was home to many top scientists, so they were well equipped to create a nuclear weapon. For example, nuclear fission was discovered by a team which included Otto Robert Frisch and Lisa Meitner in Berlin in 1938. In the following year, the Nazis began various experiments to use this discovery to create a nuclear weapon. Some studies focused on building a nuclear reactor, while others looked at using heavy water for an atomic bomb, with research being conducted in Nazi-controlled Norway throughout the war. Back in August 1939, President Roosevelt in Washington, D.C., received a letter from Hungarian nuclear physicist Leo Szilard and Albert Einstein, warning the U.S. government about the dangers of these Nazi experiments. However, not much was done to respond to this alert. When the United States entered the war at the end of 1941, renewed focus was placed on America starting its own studies in this field. Oppenheimer was to technically lead the Los Alamos laboratory during the World War II, but this was all part of the Manhattan Project, a research program started by the US government in 1942 with the main goal of creating a nuclear bomb. The name comes from the fact that the team responsible for the larger project first met in 1942 on Manhattan Island in New York City. Eventually, starting in 1942, the project grew to employ around 130,000 people nationwide. They worked on different aspects of the project in various states and locations. For example, a large group in Chicago throughout the war included Oppenheimer's former colleague from Göttingen, Enrico Fermi, and Leo Szilard, who had written a letter to Roosevelt in 1939 warning him about the Nazi nuclear project. This team created the first working nuclear reactor. Another group at the Hanford site in Washington was tasked with making plutonium from uranium as a raw material for future nuclear weapons, and a similar project was happening in Tennessee. There were also teams in Europe working under the Manhattan Project banner who were engaging in spying to find out what the Nazis were developing. Oppenheimer was responsible for the most crucial research team within the Manhattan Project as the director of the Los Alamos laboratory in New Mexico. He was almost not chosen for this role. The leader of the Manhattan Project was Major General Leslie Groves. Groves might not be a widely recognized name today, but he is notable for leading both the Manhattan Project, which created the first nuclear bomb, and for overseeing the building of the Pentagon, the headquarters for the U.S. military and Department of Defense. In 1942, Oppenheimer was recommended to Groves as a potential leader for a group of theoretical physicists and scientists for the Manhattan Project. But Groves was initially unsure, preferring someone who had won a Nobel Prize in physics and, therefore, would have the necessary reputation to lead some of the top minds of that time. However, he was eventually convinced that Oppenheimer had a proven ability to bring out the best in his colleagues. Groves contacted Oppenheimer, and after meeting with him, he decided that Oppenheimer was a good fit for the position. In the following weeks in early winter of 1942, Oppenheimer looked for a suitable place to set up a research center, ideally a secluded location far from any cities to maintain confidentiality. He finally chose Los Alamos in New Mexico as the location, where a research center was built on the grounds of a former school. This was assigned to the University of California by the War Department, allowing Oppenheimer a certain level of freedom in hiring and dismissing staff, while he served as the head of the Los Alamos laboratory. This concludes the first part of the documentary. If you enjoyed it, stay tuned for the second part. I hope you found this video helpful and inspiring. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know what topics you'd like to see next. Thank you for watching.